Welcome to the Manitoba Ag Days podcast, where we hear from some of the most relevant, up-to-date, informational speakers in our industry. In episode 10, Rob Hannam, founder, Synthesis Agri-Food Network, shares his story, Increasing Farm Organization Impact.
All right, good afternoon. There's lots of room up front here. If those of you want to move down, you're welcome to. There's more space here. This is an important topic, and thank you for those who did take time out of a fun, exciting trade show with tractors and new seed varieties and exciting things to come and listen and learn and discuss. So my name is Rob Hannam. For the next 15 minutes, I'll explain what the proposal is. I see several familiar faces in the room. You have heard it before. There's some new folks that are just learning about it. And then we'll open it up for discussion and comments. And especially for folks who haven't been to one of our meetings yet, we did 3 consultation meetings last week. Several of you attended those. If you didn't attend, I'd love to hear new questions and new comments from you. So I'll try to go quickly to make sure we got time for that discussion. So what's being proposed? 5 producer organizations here in Manitoba are already collaborating really, really well together. You should know, like 4 of these groups are co-located in the same building in Carman, Manitoba. They're sharing staff. They're sharing resources. In my view, they're making very good use of your levy dollars and funneling that into research and also some into market development. What we're looking is, can we take the collaboration to the next level? Is that a benefit to you as producers? And so are we better together? Are there things we could do if it was amalgamated into one common organization? So that is the proposal, the group that's open for discussion. So corn producers, flax, pulse and soybean growers, which as you know is several crops, lentils, peas, edible beans, soybeans, sunflowers, as well as the wheat and barley growers. So those are the 5 associations that are in this amalgamation proposal at this point. In terms of other reasons why we would do this, I guess extension. By extension, I mean the agronomy work, the training days, the newsletter, website, communication, the trial results, all of that stuff. Could it be more efficient if it was together and you received one e-newsletter or had one set of training days as opposed to 5 organizations trying to offer you training sessions or sending you newsletters and trial results? Internally, operations and systems improvements. So you don't really see that from the outside, but I really want to understand, if we put it together, could the operational systems, more than just the accounting systems, but research management, your database, how the levy's collected, all of those things, could they be more efficient together? And then finally, just staff time, efficient use of staff time and equipment. If we can realign things as one organization, are we going to be better off? So those are some of the reasons why. Now I'll go into the details of what the proposal is. When I talked to the steering committee, it's been a great group to work with. It's 2 farmers directors from each of the 5 boards, so 10 farmers, and then 4 staff members. And that's the group I've worked with since late in the spring. And over the past 5 months, we've developed this proposal. Several meetings and discussions, lots of ideas. Typically, I would lay out 3 or 4 ideas. The steering committee would say, let's take the best from idea 2 and idea 3. We'll put that together. And then we'd go on, and 6 weeks later at our next meeting, we'd kind of rehash that again and tweak it. And this is the proposal that you see today. So we do want to make sure, by bringing the groups together, that we build on best practices. I see room for that. Some of the groups are doing a better job at research management, how you track your research projects. You've got a big investment in research, and that's one of the ways that we could learn from the best of the best. Leveraging research funding and grants. That's what you want your organizations to do. Take your farmer dollars and then get additional government funding. And when I look at the percent leverage, some of the groups are doing better than others. Let's see if we can, bring them all up to the highest level. Communication and farmer outreach. There's a lot of newsletters, emails, advertisements, training days. Can we be more coordinated, and would you be better off with that? And then just those operational systems. When I think about it, it's really an extension of what's already in place. So what you need to decide as producers is, this seems to be working right now. 2 of the groups handle multiple crops. The wheat and barley growers have 2 crops, of course. Paulson soybean growers have several. It's an extension of that same concept. By putting 5 groups together with these 9 crops, would that be better off? It seems to be working in those 2 situations from my vantage point. And could it be better expanding the concept to 5 and 9? So guiding principles. I'm lucky in my job. I get to work with farmer organizations and boards of directors across Canada. I grew up on a farm, but just a little bit east of here. And I get to work with different groups. Whenever I start with the board of directors, we want to look at what are the guiding principles that you agree on as a steering committee and board that will guide how we make decisions. And there's 6 points I want to go through quickly here that explain how decisions that guided the process and development of this proposal. So the first thing we looked at is the structure of the board. And the steering committee determined that the board will represent all farmer members who grow these crops. The initial concept will be that we will select board members from each of the 5 organizations, and that will form an initial board of an amalgamated group. But when you are elected to that new organization and sit as a farmer director, you represent all 9 crops. We're not proposing that there'll be 2 directors who represent sunflowers only, or 2 directors that represent lentils only. You'll represent all 9 crops. And most of you do grow 2, 3, 5, 6 of these crops. So it's a very diverse cropping area. So you'll need to represent all of the crops that are paying a levy into that organization. That's the first guiding principle. The second is that research investments won't be directly linked to the levy income that comes into the organization for that crop. The board, the steering committee was adamant that yes, if levy funds come in from a crop, that crop will get research. But the level of research in any one year might be up a little bit or down a little bit from that actual amount. And the reason for that was to provide flexibility. So what if we've got a need to do more research in this crop this year? I understand there's a new pea processing plant coming into the province. Maybe now is the time to ramp up agronomy research in field peas. So we want to invest more in the next 2 years in that, but maybe 3 years from now, it's a different priority. And using this as a guiding principle will allow you that flexibility to shift research to make sure you meet the needs today, and you're also got some flexibility for the future. So supporting diverse crop rotations. As I worked with the steering committee, it was very rewarding for me, but just thinking about the long-term success of farms in Manitoba is I really hear loud and clear you want cropping options, you want sustainable crop rotations, and by pulling these groups together, it's one of the mindset shifts. As opposed to being a single crop focus, you're now a multi-crop focus. A single crop organization is less likely to do crop rotation studies, less likely to do research that's about the crop rotation in general because you've got one focus. You may say, that's what I want. I want that one focus. What I'm hearing from the steering committee is they want a broader focus, that they value a whole farm approach, a multi-year approach, a multi-crop approach. And that's really what this is. So it's up to you as farmer directors and members of these groups to tell us what you think, because this is what we're proposing, is multi-crop, which is a whole farm sort of perspective, not the single crop focus. So 3 more, and then I'll kind of keep moving here. This organization is set up, has been discussed by 5, or this proposal by 5 organizations. Those 5 groups signed a memorandum of understanding in April, and that's a 1-year MOU to develop this and collaborate and see what comes of it. We've structured it so that other groups could be added in the future. If this proceeds and if it works, then why not extend other crops? And so that definitely is something that's been in mind. It'll be structured so that other crops could be added in the future if that time comes and if others wish. And then I guess a final one here, just once you're part of a multi-crop group, you would never advocate one crop over the other. So it would be maybe a little bit different than the single crop approach you've got today. Your organizations are mainly research and agronomy organizations. You invest in long-term research contracts with research partners, and we just heard about some of the investments from the wheat and barley growers with great breeding programs that are being developed. So that's one part of it. The other part is like on-farm agronomy, and the Manitoba Pulse and soybean growers have a very, a farmer network of on-farm trials. That is between 50% and up to 70% of the budget of these current organizations. So most of your dollars are going in that area. So symbolically, it's the biggest part. The blue area is your core functions. The second function that you're mandated, or the purpose of your organization in your articles of incorporation, is for market development. Now, 3 of the 5 groups are doing market development now. I see that, in some ways that would increase in the future or decrease. It really depends on the priorities set by the board at that time as to how much you'd spend in market development. But that's clearly, that will continue to be the focus of these organizations. Core functions that support the organization, communications and member relations, and then of course operations and finance. So that's the organizational structure, and that's the approximate weighting of the budget. Right? So the biggest block there is research and agronomy. That's going to continue to be 60, 70% of your budget. Governance structure. So this is quite important with farmer organizations, so we spent a lot of time on this. We started off laying out different options. Do we have regions, or is it the whole province like we have today? How many members do we need on the board? How are they elected? And here's where we landed. The steering committee came up with a proposal that we have 15 farmer directors. The current boards of directors of these 5 groups range from 7 directors up to 11 directors. We decided that wasn't quite enough. We're proposing 15 directors at this point. They're all farmers. A few people have emailed comments into me, and someone said it would be companies, and that's not the case. These are farmer-run organizations. They're not-for-profit corporations. The members are producers who grow these crops, and the only directors involved are farmer directors. So we're proposing 15. There'll be board committees, official committees in your bylaws as well. And the group also came up with an idea to improve how the organization connects with the grassroots. So we're going to be proposing to have annual regional meetings for members. None of the groups, to my knowledge, have those types of meetings today. And sometimes, we want to reach out and we hold a meeting and we only get a few people. We're still going to give it our best effort and try to make sure we understand what the needs are across the province. So this new group we're proposing would have annual regional meetings to really try and make sure we're connected with farmers across the province. The board structure, whenever you create a new organization, you need to appoint the first board of directors, and then elections would happen after that. So we're proposing to appoint the new board made up of 3 directors from each of the current 5 organizations. 3 times 5 is 15. And then over time, every year, some of those directors their term will be up. So of the 15 that are appointed, some will have a 3-year term, some will have a 2-year term, and some will have a 1-year term. And so on year 1, 5 directors would need to run to be reelected, or new people could run as well. And over a period of time, over the 3 years, we'd have 5 new directors added and 5 would come off the board. And so we felt this was a good balance of keeping continuity and consistency. We want to make sure that we keep the knowledge we've got with your current directors, but then also making sure we move quickly so it's elected by the membership of the new organization. So that's the proposal for the board size. Timing. So we're in the consultation period now, and I had 3 meetings last week. We've got a website address and an email that we're collecting comments at as well. And then this leads up to the annual general meetings at Crop Connect, which is in February, so not too long. If things keep moving forward, the memorandum of understanding would need to be renewed in April. And the target for this is about a year from now. There's lots of things that could get in the way of this or could slow it down. But right now our target is that, if things keep moving, we would bring a resolution to the annual meetings of 2019. So a year from now, that's when members would vote to approve this amalgamation or not. So today we're collecting feedback. That'll go to the steering committee and then the 5 boards of directors. They'll determine what to do. How do we keep going? How could we improve the proposal? We've got some other ideas that came up just last week about improving collaborations, and we don't even need to amalgamate to do those. So there's some good ideas that have come out of the meetings already that we're going to recommend we implement right away. So there's good stuff, but it's February 2019, targeting for a decision by farmer members, you guys, And if that happens, then it would be our target that it would be implemented as August 1st, 2019. Now, there's a few things that could change here. The Farm Products Marketing Council would need to approve that the levy be redirected to this new organization. I'm not quite sure of the timing on that. And Manitoba Agriculture, of course, needs to approve of this as well. So that's our target timing. All right, I want to just go quickly to a few things. I've got some benefits and then questions that have come up, and then we'll open the floor here. So benefits, I've kind of touched on these already. Here's what I see. These are the top 4 things. The first is improved research agronomy. I do feel you'll get more efficient, independent farmer research. So I think that's a really good benefit. You'll be able to leverage more government funding, so make your dollars go further. That's the biggest benefit I see. Second benefit is the ability to attract and retain a highly skilled team. So there's a big difference in the staffing of these organizations. One of the organizations has half a staff member, one has, and then it ranges up to a group with 5 or 6 or 7 staff. When this goes ahead, like overall, what we're looking at with the steering committee is the staffing level wouldn't change. When I presented this last week, someone was quick off the mic to ask me a question about this big staffing group that we're adding, and that's actually not the case, but we will have a chance to realign positions. So at this point, the steering committee's view is that the staff level would stay the same, but we can realign and reduce any overlaps. There are some overlaps that naturally exist when you have 5 separate legal entities. So despite the great collaboration that's there today, there still are some natural overlaps. We can get rid of those and maybe reuse those funds either into research projects or more agronomists or a specialist in a certain area. So there's lots of opportunities. Stronger voice for farmers. This group would have 8,000 members, 8,000 farmers, crop producers. It would include about 60% of the field crop acres here in the province. And I think another benefit is just more unified communication to you, the growers. Fewer groups trying to get at you to share their information, because there's a lot of overlap. When we calculated overlap, it's about 55% minimum on any given year, because you grow 2, 3, 5, 7 crops, and you're likely members of 2 or 3 or all 5 of these organizations on any given year. So that's the benefits. There's been some really good questions that have come up, and here's some questions or concerns that have been raised. I've got 4 of them. The first one I've heard loud and clear. A gentleman at the St. Jean Farm Days last week asked me this, and his question was about edible beans. He felt that some crops, the smaller acreage crops, would get lost. And so fair enough. What we're going to, it's a valid concern that we need to address and make sure we don't let that happen. Nobody's starting this idea so that a small crop gets lost. If anything, it's the reverse. We want to make sure we have cropping options. So what we're going to do, the organization will hold those regional grassroots feedback meetings. I think that's a way to improve it. That's one thing we can do. Second is, the initial board of directors will be made up of 3 directors from each group. 3 from sunflower, 3 from flax, 3 from wheat and barley, 3 from pulse and soybean. So naturally off the start, we've got that full representation. Crop diversity has, from the steering committee standpoint, is one of those guiding principles. We want crop diversity. And then someone at a meeting on Friday actually said the reverse to me. We were discussing this just north of Winnipeg, and he said to me, at the end of the day, I see the smaller crops benefiting because they're getting subsidized, was his word, but they'll get more attention and more resources being part of this group than they would if they were on their own with an organization that had fewer or 1 or 2 or no staff. And it's just run by what I'm calling heroic farmer volunteers. So we've got a couple of those situations today, and those crops would really benefit. So that's the first concern that's been raised, and a couple of my responses to that. The second, again, really valid. Haven't solved this one totally yet, and it's about farmer director workload. How many of you want more time in meetings? Not many of you. You've got a farm business, you've got family, you've got things to do, yet you also want to be involved with where your levy dollars go and you want to make your crop successful. So this is a challenging one. We've got to figure this out. The board of the new organization we're proposing would serve more as a governance board. We need to move a little bit more in that direction and less hands-on and being able to delegate tasks to the staff. Now that doesn't mean that the farmers aren't in charge. Definitely a farmer board, they would set the budget. They would set research priorities. You would approve research projects. But there'd be smaller things that you could delegate to the staff team to do on your behalf, which should mean, make it effective. The organization, I think, would have more staff to be able to fill in, sometimes for farmer directors. Not all the time. When you go to other meetings with sister organizations, at some point it would, you need farmers at those meetings, so that's important. We do expect the workload for your directors to be higher in the first few years. And we also, we analyze the outside organizations, the number of days of activity, and we expect the workload to be similar if the workload is shared equally among the directors. On the few of your organizations today, you've got, a number of the board, like a smaller number that are volunteering a lot, and they're able to do they're doing quite a bit of the work. If you share the workload, we feel this group of 15, will be similar to the workload today. So just moving quickly here, sorry, dragging on a bit, but levy refunds was raised, and certainly that's something we need to think about here. Currently, if a producer wants to get a refund on their levy, they must apply to each organization separately. That might be easier if the organizations were all together, and that's a risk for you and your organizations. So we heard a proposal or an idea last week that maybe it shouldn't be all or nothing, it should be crop specific, and so I'll be taking that back as part of the feedback to the steering committee, but we need to really think about this one. And the final one, I've already touched on this, just that admin costs and overhead. So totally admin costs, we do not expect to increase. We expect the staffing level to stay the same, but positions can be realigned. Over time, this group will be more efficient and your percent of admin costs would go down over time. So I would like to open it up for questions. I've got a few minutes left for questions, I think. So, yeah, great question. Thank you. So the question and comment is really, will the board of directors need to understand all 9 crops? Or will they be generalists on all the crops? Or do you envision it that it will be a few specialists or that have a corn committee or something like that? And we're still in the middle of that. At this point, we're thinking generalists. We're thinking that it's going to be, as a farmer, you would sit down and I might grow 3 crops and you might grow 7 of the crops. There's likely going to be some knowledge about each of those at a certain level. I guess if specialists were needed, that could be brought in from the staff. But at this point, we're thinking generalists. We're not thinking that the board would be divided up then into a corn committee and a flax committee at this point. Do you have a comment or reaction? What makes sense to you? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
For questions, or
Yeah.
do you have a little bit to?
Yeah, we're ready for questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm always a little bit behind. Any other questions? Questions or comments?
So,
Yeah, I think what we're not anticipating spending any more dollars on staff, and I guess from my standpoint, what I see is maybe staff might be prepping me as a director, so I don't have to spend quite as much time going through those reports. I think was one point I heard from you, Butch, and the other one was right now we're already hiring or seeking out additional help on areas, just like the plant breeding as an example. So that's certainly not going to end. And I do hear your concern that this has to be farmer driven first, and we're certainly cognizant of that. Any other questions? Yeah. Repeat the, yeah. There was a concern that we're saying we're not hiring staff, but with lack of directors, we're going to have to hire staff, and that would evolve into a non-farmer organization. To paraphrase a little bit, Butch, is that close?
Great. Let's take the next question here. But in the meantime, speaking of staff, Tobin, Pam, or Darcel, we do have a half-page survey. I know it's a bit awkward with this room, but I'd love if you could, we're going to pass out this half-page survey. I did this at each of the meetings last week, and give me your feedback. So if you could write down if you're in favor, if you have suggestions, if you're not in favor, and give us some ideas. So we'll pass this down to the aisles. We'll try to collect them at the top of each ramp at the end of this presentation and the end of the next one. So we'll get that started, but let's have our next question here.
Okay, sure.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Rob. I do worry about checkoffs. Certainly in Western Canada, I'm thinking about 8% is about the checkoff refund rate right now. I believe in Manitoba we decertify at 13%. I think if you go below 87%, I think you decertify. So I worry that it will be extremely easy for a farmer to pick up the phone and get all of his checkoffs back with one quick phone call. Even more worrisome is the fact that there are major Western Canadian farm accounting firms who are now suggesting that farmers request their checkoffs back, which I consider treasonous, and I worry like a mother, right? Wrong.
Okay, thank you.
The
comment, just to repeat back the comment, it's regarding levy refunds. And you mentioned levy refunds are at 8%. Which crop is that for?
Not typically what canola runs across Western.
Okay, so that's for one of the other crops. And each of our crops does have some levy refunds as well at different levels. Your concern is that if it's easier, more people might do it, and that might mean
And not only that, but look who's conspiring to convince the farmer to do that as well.
right.
And I consider that treasonous.
So that's a fair comment, but in my opinion, that's not part of our proposal. I think all the...
Well, it sure as hell should.
So that comment, just for those who couldn't hear, it was related to an accounting firm had been allegedly sort of encouraging farmers to seek a refund, and that you disagree with that. Okay. Great. So levy refunds, definitely we've raised that as a risk. I'll be taking this feedback to the steering committee. I don't have any other wisdom on it yet. Any comments?
Yeah, I guess the only thought that we had at the discussion was, producers decide if our organization is not doing the job, then absolutely the only way they can tell us is through refunds. So we didn't want to restrict that. Mind you, we also had the discussion about non-refundable checkoffs too. So a lot were in that camp as well. Any other questions or comments?
Got a comment up here in the middle?
Sure. The question was, how are we going to cut our relationships with the national organizations that do our policy work? So far, we were proposing to continue on with those. We weren't going to change our function as it is today, unless I maybe didn't hear that right, Jack. Is that what you were? Yeah, good. I can add a bit more
So your current organizations are part of some sister or national associations, like Pulse Canada, for example, and Soy Canada. So Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers is part of Soy Canada and part of Pulse Canada. So we view that that would continue. We had some initial conversations with them months ago, just saying, if this did go ahead, would we continue? And of course, the answer was yes, because you as farmers are funding that group. So the check's going that way, and it wasn't raised as a barrier by those groups, and we certainly would intend to continue. It's the board's decision to be part of those groups or not, and so it would be a board of directors decision, but at this point it would continue. Does that answer your question?
Good time for a couple more questions? Sure.
Yes. Okay, great, thank you. The comment was on the guiding principles, number 5, I said that one crop would not advocate directly against another. And then he pointed out that, well, just earlier I had said that on number 2, that research investment wouldn't be tied directly to the levy. So the group's committed that if there is levy income from a crop, that crop will get research. The levy, the amount of that research in any year will be determined by the board of directors. Someone last week suggested we put a minimum. So maybe it's a minimum of 75% of that levy must be invested in that crop each year. And that gives the board some flexibility to spend more certain years or spend less if the needs change or there's a really good project in some other area. When I was talking about not advocating, I was really meaning about we wouldn't publicly go out in this organization and say, this crop's way better than that crop, you should grow more of this, don't grow that. I was more thinking we wouldn't publicly, your agronomist in this new group would be pointing out the data that you as a farmer could choose between all of the crops. They wouldn't be saying, pick that one, it's better than the other one, because they represent all. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So a question was the stimulus for this discussion comments from grain companies about their concerns with organizations or funding? And crop processors, yeah. So no, not to my knowledge.
No, it's absolutely not. I think originally, this isn't a new idea. Producers over the years, a number of years, have had the suggestion that there should be less and there should be more cooperation. And I know from Manitoba Wheat and Barley's standpoint, we've tried to work with Saskatchewan and Alberta, and then of course we have the idea, well, maybe we should be working with Manitoba as well. So zero was that an influence on what we're doing here today. I think we've got time for one more question, and then we'll have to move on.
Over here, yes.
Sure.
I believe that if we possibly stay status quo, that we run very real risk of more levy withdrawals, even if we try and make one big group.
Okay, so
I look at the younger generation coming along right now that are all taking over farm succession. They're looking at their operations as a line item, expenses. I think that a larger group may bring some betterment, possibly, some better research, better staffing. Hopefully, if we're doing our jobs, it'll stay static. But we still run the real risk of withdrawals doing what we're doing today.
okay, so for those of you who couldn't hear, it was more of a comment, not a question, but I'll just paraphrase it. It was regarding the levy withdrawal discussion that we had 5 minutes ago, and your comment was just that we face that risk anyway, whether we're separated groups or together, and You want to make sure the younger producers who are taking over the farm see value in what we're doing and understand what we're doing, so that they stay involved and see it as a good investment. And why don't we change what we're doing if they don't see it as a good investment and make sure we do deliver on what it is. So great, thanks for that comment.
I think that's about time. Okay, if you could complete those surveys, I'll have two of staff will Tobin and Darcel. Darcel's waving at the back, and Tobin where?
Right up there.
Right up there. Okay.
Tobin's over here. So if you could like just pass those surveys into them, we'd really appreciate it. We'll be here at the end of this session or after the next speaker. And I do apologize in advance to the next speaker. We've gone over our time a few minutes, and thank you for that indulgence. But I appreciate being here.
Yeah, perfect. So thank you very much, Rob.
Thanks for tuning in to the Manitoba Ag Days podcast. We'll see you next year from January 22nd to 24th, 2019.